peace of Christ reign in your hearts. Let the message of Christ find a home with you.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
After the wise men had left, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother with you and escape into Egypt, and stay there until I tell you, because Herod intends to search for the child and to do away with him." So Joseph got up, and taking the child and his mother with him, left that night for Egypt, where he stayed until Herod was dead. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken through the prophet, "I called my son out of Egypt." After Herod's death, the angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother with you and go back to the land of Israel, for those who wanted to kill the child are dead." So Joseph got up and taking the child and his mother with him, went back to the land of Israel. But when he had learned that Archelaus had succeeded his father Herod as ruler of Judea, he was afraid to go there, and being warned in a dream, he left for the region of Galilee. There he settled in a town called Nazareth. In this way, the words spoken to the prophets were to be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Good evening, everyone. We are still in the season of Christmas, the octave of Christmas. And today we celebrate the feast, the solemnity of the Holy Family. Traditionally, I'm just telling you this, traditionally it's always the first Sunday after Christmas. But this year, the first Sunday falls on the solemnity of Mary, the Mother of God, New Year. So the church has moved this celebration to Friday before the weekend. When you begin to look a bit about this celebration of the Holy Family, it's not a very old traditional celebration. It's a very new, still fresh in the liturgy of the church. It's just about 100 years back, somewhere in the 19th century. But the history of it goes back to the early Christians, the Coptics of Egypt. You know, when you study the history of the liturgy of the Holy Family. And now, today, we celebrate this in the church liturgical calendar, you know. There's so much that I could talk to you, you know, when I listen to the readings today. It's so rich, it's so profoundly rich about the relationship of a family, a relationship of a husband and a wife, a relationship of parents and children. It's about the whole experience of family life today. And yet, deep down within myself, and I guess many of us have come to accept the reality that the family life is going through what I call a culture of death today. It's going through a great challenge today. Almost every year without fail, you will have a celebration on family life, on marriage. And yet, deep down, we know that there's a great struggle that is unfolding in marriage and in family life today. So much is happening. When you begin to look at the documents of the church, I've always found the documents, the most rich documents is Familiaris Consortio by St. John Paul II. One of the most beautiful documents that you could ever stay with on family life. Everything that you need to talk on family life is in that document. And in the years that has passed, they've always drawn from this whole experience of this document of St. John Paul II, family in the modern world. And yet we know the communications have broken down. Dysfunctional moments of family life has erupted. Marriage is going through moments of collapse. And yet we find ourselves today praying earnestly and treating the Lord, and most importantly, placing our families at the mercy of God. Family is what we call in the church a domestic church, the miniature church. You can speak about this community as church, but the family life is the domestic church, because what I am today, what you are today, originate from our families. That's all. What we have become have originated from our families. It's the bed that we find ourselves in. It's the school of life. It's a school of love that we begin our life from the family life. I'm not going to step into the documents or in the teachings or even in the readings today, but I just want to stay with the gospel text today, because when I was away with my family during this couple of days and I was just reading this text, and there were a lot of things that were happening, in my thoughts and the activities that we were doing. And I realized the gospel text had a lot to tell me, a lot to tell me in family life today. If you take a moment to look at the gospel text, there's a lot of motions. Get up. He fled. He left. He moved. He stayed. There was a lot of what I call today family in movements. There's a lot of movements. You find him from Bethlehem. From Bethlehem, he moved to Egypt. It's a whole movement of demography, of geography movements. And then he goes back to Nazareth. There's a whole movement. And today, when you look at family life today, there's a lot of movements today. Your children move in and move out. Whether it's education or whether it's marriage, or whether they find that it's uncomfortable, because they will always say, I can choose my friends, but I can't choose my family. There's a lot of movements that is happening. Families are now separated when one partner of the party has to leave the nation to find some economic sustenance in another nation. Migrants and refugees. You find this a lot today, family in movements. In the whole scriptures, especially in the Gospels, you'll find a lot of movements. Get up, walked. Look at Elizabeth and Mary. Just after that, Mary at haste left and went on the road in search of Elizabeth. Joseph today, you will find this word, get up and moved. Because everything was happening today. And when you begin to look at your life today as a family, you will find a lot of movements today. A lot of movements among your children, among marriages. Something is unfolding. And today when we look at the family life today, I'm just going to ask you to stay with the family life of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. It may not be the perfect family if you begin to look at what happened to that family. There were a lot of struggles. There were a lot of questions that left in the life of Mary. There were a lot of hesitations and doubts and anxiety when Jesus was missing in the caravan, in the temple. Mary didn't understand many things when the son said to him, I'm about doing my father's business. She treasured them, she pondered them. Everything was in a state of movement in life. You will find this in every given moment of your life. When your daughter or your son tells you, Mom, I'm planning to move out. And maybe you would say to her, thank God you're moving out. An extra space. There's always a movement in life. There is always a movement in something part of your life. It can bring a moment of pain. It can bring a moment of hesitation in movements. If you look at the gospel to text, there were so many things that were happening in Joseph in his dreams. Get up, Joseph, and move. Stay for a while, Joseph. It's not safe because Herod is on his move. There is a lot of Herods in our life today. You just have to open up the media today that distracts us from the whole movement of the Spirit. There is a lot that is happening in us. Because I've always said this in my spiritual life. You don't have to look for Pharaoh and you don't have to look for Herod. It's inside you. They are just sitting down quietly in the moments of your anger, in your moments of your bitterness, in your moments of your resentment, in the moments you throw out words to one another, and then silently you regret if I said that, or shouldn't I said that. There is always that Herod, that stumbling block, you know. But today I'm just going to ask you for a moment to look at the family and to draw some inspiration from the gospel text of movements. How was Mary, Joseph, and Jesus able to live this family movement in perfection till the very end? Despite all the hiccups and challenges that they had, the first thing that I want you to look at the text is they were actively participating in the response of God's invitation. Everything was told to them, they did as it was asked to do. They didn't sit down and say, let me think about it. There was an active participation to the revelation of God. To use it in a very simple ways, there was a verbal response and there was a physical response. Verbal response simply means obedience. It simply means obedience. You find it in the first reading today, the book of Ecclesiastes. You know, parents, children, obedient. Obedience simply means, I've been saying this, simply means to listen to what God is saying to you. And that's the movement of the Spirit. Just take a moment and look at Elizabeth, look at Joseph, look at Zechariah, look at Mary. They were so actively involved in the whole response of God's invitation. Never once did they sit back and think, but they just stood and they responded to it. Whether it was verbally or whether it was a physical. And we need to ask ourselves in our relationships, in our marriage, in our family life, do we participate in God's invitation? Do we really, really participate fully in God's will, God's desire in our life today? To do that, my dear friends, you need to find the silence of that Spirit. You need to discern the movement of the Spirit. Because everything that happens in my life and in your life is the work of the Spirit. It is never the work of the flesh of Herod. It is always the work of the Spirit. And you just need to see, what is God asking from me? I spoke about this on Christmas Eve. The most important part is to enter into silence, because silence is the divine threshold of the doorway to enter into the divine. Silence. Just to be in silence is, God, what is it that you want me to do, God? In the midst of my pain, in the midst of my anguish, in the midst of my uncertainty in my marriage, what is it of my family life? The second thing that you could draw inspiration is to look to the yes to God. Was not just one, but it was an ongoing yes. Not just for a moment Mary said yes and said, okay, finished. She kept on saying yes and yes and yes, even till the end of the road, to the cross. She said, yes, thy will be done. When Jesus said to Mary, behold your son, and to John, behold your mother, in that silence she said yes. When Jesus looked at Mary at the wedding of Cana and says, the hour has not come, she just turned to the stewards and says, do as he tells you to do it. It was an ongoing yes. And many of us find it so hard to say this ongoing yes, because it's painful. It's about surrendering. It's about letting go. And we find it so hard. Sometimes I struggle with it in my own spiritual life. When I realize there were things that I have to let go and say yes to God. It is a very challenging part. But are you ready to do that? To this yes, 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 Lord. I am here, Lord. Do according to your will. That was what the Holy Family did till the end. And the last and the most beautiful inspiration you could find was they were rooted in God and God alone. The very core of their life was they were rooted in God. I found these three things deeply in my thoughts during these few days with my family, in my own silent moments. They were rooted with God. I love the mornings when I wake up, my mom will look at me, have you said your prayers or not? Just because you're on vacation doesn't mean you have to forget your prayer life. So I will have to go back to my room and say my prayers. Rooted in God. The deep root in God. You find this in scriptures. A man who wants to build a house, build it in 2 grounds. The sower and the seeds. Some seeds fell on different soil. It's that root, the deep-rooted experience of God. My dear sisters and brothers, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph had their struggles, in all honesty. She was even pregnant before marriage. I could go on. Joseph was not ready to accept her. He had many, many thoughts. Jesus was what one could say a disobedient son who went his way to do things without consulting the parents. There were many things that you could look, but yet you will always find these three things in them. The ongoing yes, the deeply rooted in God. What was the first one? They responded to God's invitation. Let us ask the Lord the grace, my dear sisters and brothers, to look within ourselves this evening, to pray for our family, for all our families. It could be another family that you know of who is struggling at this very moment. In the midst of communication, in the midst of love, in the midst of reaching out. Let us ask the Lord the grace today to touch our families and to pray for them and to pray for one another. Because what you and I are today, we originate from our families.